Now if I go back in the game, there you go, look at that, yay! Yay, it works, yay! Okay, awesome, whoo! That was tricky. Hello and welcome, I'm your Code Mickey. So this weekend I tried to do something pretty fun. I tried to build a factory automation game in 48 hours. That's a very complex genre that requires writing a ton of code. Unity is turning 20 years old this year, and to celebrate that, one of the things they did is run their anniversary game jam. For me, it's been about 4 years since I last did a game jam. Back then, I built a fun racing RTS game. That was interesting. Now, normally I don't do game jams. I talked about why in this video. Basically, game jams have lots of pros and lots of cons. And for me, with my level of experience, the cons really just outweigh the pros. Although game jams are still fun, so I figured I'd celebrate with Unity themselves and do this jam. Now, this video is sponsored by Unity. Although they didn't actually require me to participate in the game jam, I really just wanted to do it myself since it's been such a long time. And I actually wanted to try making a game live on a stream. So I built about, let's say, half of this on stream. Out of the 48 hours on live stream for about 20. By the way, thanks to everyone who joined me on live streams. These were definitely quite fun, even though by the end my throat was definitely messed up. So the theme for the game jam. They announced it on Friday, and the theme was timeless. There it is, a very interesting theme that can be interpreted in many different ways. So right away started off one of the hardest parts of any game jam, basically trying to come up with an idea that sort of fits the theme. Now thankfully I had some help for brainstorming since I was on live stream, so I could chat with people. Being able to think out loud and talk to people, that helps quite a lot on the brainstorming process. Brainstorming is a very important part. You shouldn't really just jump to the first thing that comes to your mind. You should think a little bit more carefully as to what exactly you're trying to do. So I definitely recommend you do brainstorming, and I definitely recommend you don't just think by yourself. You get a lot better ideas by really just thinking alongside others. So those can be either teammates or friends, or in this case, live chat. Or if you don't have that, if you're alone, then I think this is actually an excellent use case for AI. AIs, or rather LLMs, they're really great for talking. So you can just ask it for ideas. Give me 10 ideas to make a game for a game jam with the theme Timeless. And if there you go, start generating things. And again, out of these ideas, chances are that about half of them will be pretty bad. A handful of them will be kind of decent, but at least one of them will likely spark something in you. Like I said, 2 heads are better than 1, and if you can find another human head, that's great, but if you can't, then AI, this one works really great. And as I'm brainstorming, another thing that I like to do is really just write down on paper. In this case, since I was on a live stream, instead of using actual paper, I really just use a virtual whiteboard. This is personally how I like to design. Basically, there are a billion ways you can design your games. And personally, this one really just writing down some headlines, that is usually my preferred method. So I really just think on a very high-level overview on what exactly is the game idea, what exactly I'm trying to build. And of course, brainstorming means exploring lots of different ideas. Like I said, don't get just stuck on the first thing that comes to your mind. Try to think more carefully of what would be a better idea, and importantly, what would be an idea that is achievable within the time frame you have. So I thought of various ways to explore this theme. So I thought about time as currency. So you would use that as basically the main resource in order to build some kind of machine. Then I thought about something like the excellent game Minute. This is a super cool game where the whole thing rests on basically just 1 minute, so after 1 minute the entire world resets. It's a very clever idea, and I thought, why don't I apply this to some kind of factory automation game? Then I also thought about balancing, so having positive and negative time crystals and trying to keep those at balance. So yeah, basically lots and lots of ideas. But I did settle on one thing quite quickly. I really wanted to make a factory automation game, and I wanted that mainly for 2 reasons. So first of all, I really just like the genre. Factory is definitely one of my favorite games of all time. So as a player, it's something that I enjoy, and as a developer, it's also something that I enjoy making. This is a very programming heavy genre, so it definitely suits my strong points. And this is also something you should do during game jams. You should choose an idea that plays to your strengths. Remember how game jams are super short. In this case, this was just 48 hours. So there's really no time to learn something completely new. You can explore a handful of new things, but for the most part, you should rely on what you already know, so that you can be confident that you can actually build something in the time you have. And secondly, I want to make a factory game really just as a personal challenge. This is a very complex genre that usually takes quite a lot of time, like weeks or months to make. So I very much really just wanted to test myself. I wanted to see, do I have the skills to build such a complex game so quickly? So after about an hour of brainstorming, it was time to finally start working on the game. And as always, starting with some very basic simple cubes. For me, I really just first focus on getting the actual gameplay, the actual prototype working, and only later on do I actually worry about visuals. I started by focusing on the crucial part of this genre. I started by making the conveyor belts and basically putting items on the belts and having those go from an input into a certain output. And by the way, one question that I was asked multiple times during the game jam is, what about clean code? Do I write quick and dirty code during game jam, or do I still take the time to make it properly? And the answer is, yep, I definitely do take the time to make it properly. Even though this is a game jam, I still want to make sure to write high quality clean code. Now, it won't ever be as high quality as if I had a bit more time to think about things, but still I definitely try to keep things as clean as possible. So now I don't really write the quick and dirty way, because usually that doesn't even end up being much faster. Once you are skilled enough, once you know how to write good clean code, then it generally is faster to actually write the proper way as opposed to writing something quick and dirty. So yep, I quickly started thinking of a proper architecture for this code. I started defining some interface in order to connect all the things, connect the belts, the time machine, and so on. Then I wrote the code for moving items on the belt, and pretty quickly I had basically a mining machine, a time machine, and a belt sending items between them. Now another crucial thing is basically focusing on one thing at a time. So over here I was really just focusing on testing that part, testing the conveyor belts, the buildings, and so on. So at this point I did not have any kind of building system. In order to build things, I was really just manually placing the buildings directly inside the game and then playing in order to test them out. This is really how I recommend you build your games. Basically build them system by system, one by one, instead of trying to build the whole thing at once. Then since I focused on writing good clean code, I was actually able to implement the belts and items relatively quickly. In just about an hour of building the prototype, I already had quite a lot of things working. I've got a bunch of mining machines, a bunch of items, conveyor belts, the whole thing moves around, spawns items, moves them, everything works. So when this was done, I basically took a break to have dinner, then I worked a little bit more, and then importantly, I actually went to bed. Now, one of the reasons why I don't do game jams is because they are actually usually very stressful and they encourage some pretty unhealthy behavior. They encourage you to stay up all night without sleeping for 40 hours, that's really not good. So personally, I made sure to have a decent night of sleep. I really don't want to sacrifice my health just for a game jam. Then day 2 started off by me doing a bunch of work off stream. Importantly, I was thinking about the design a little bit more, so I basically expanded the whiteboard quite a lot. You are never ever going to get the design 100% perfect on your first try. As you have more time to think, you will come up with some better ideas. So that's another reason why really just sleeping or just going for a walk, that is usually a great thing. Having some time off from your computer to think, that will allow you to come up with some much better ideas. So I reworked a bunch of things that really just didn't work, mainly the balance mechanic. I realized it was going to be very difficult to give the players some kind of purpose as to why they should go out of balance. I couldn't come up with a good way to make the player go out of balance in order to potentially take a punishment, in order to build something to then go back into balance. So that whole thing was very strange, so I brilliantly just went back into having the time-based idea. Basically, time constantly counts down. When it reaches 0, then basically you go into the upgrade screen, you upgrade some stuff, then go back, build some more stuff, and so on. Next, I work on the types of crystals. And here was actually another very interesting point on stream. Now, first off, I started off by defining an actual enum for the type, for the time crystal type. That's really the easiest way to define the type. Enums are really simple, really awesome. If you don't know about enums, I have a lecture on them in my C# course. These are really awesome, you definitely should know about them. But enums are also limited, that's kind of the issue. They really can only store one piece of data, just the enum itself. So I started off by storing enums, and then I realized that I wanted a little bit more flexibility on the actual item type. And what I did was quite simple. I really just refactored my code to use scriptable objects instead. So this is a very crucial thing that I've mentioned many times. For example, this recent video on how to refactor. Refactoring is a perfectly natural and a very important part of the process. You are never going to write perfect code the very first time around, so really don't be afraid of refactoring. Write something, then if you come up with a better way of doing things, like it happened to me here, really just go back, refactor, remake it, come up with a better way, and then move forward. So yep, I made a scriptable object to define the time crystal types. And by the way, if you don't know about scriptable objects, that is one of my favorite TNT features, so definitely go watch this tutorial on them. And something that I was also asked on stream is, how can I build these things, these kinds of things very, very quickly? And the answer to that is really pretty simple. It is really just experience. The more code you write, the better you become. In my entire 27 years of programming experience, I've written millions of lines of code. So for example, I've written tons of scriptable object type systems, so I know exactly what code to write. That is really why I recommend you really just make more games and just write more code. Experience is truly invaluable. It is the most awesome thing that will make you much faster at building anything you want. Another thing that makes me super fast are basically shortcuts. It is very important to know the tools that you're using and know them very well. I made a video where I talked about all the shortcuts that I use. They seem quite a lot when you put them all like this, but after you use them for quite a while, they really become second nature. And if you know all of these, or if you know whatever shortcuts are most helpful to you, if you know them, the difference between no shortcuts and shortcuts is a pretty massive amount. So then with a quick test, I already had multiple different types of crystals working, so I could gather blue crystals and gather red crystals, and everything worked fine. So I've got the mining, I've got the conveyor belts, different types of crystals, I've got a time machine, everything works great. Again, this really is the power of experience. I've already written many gathering systems just like this, where I place down something, look for nearby objects, and then move them around. So because I've done this many times, that is how I can do this so quickly. And really same thing for the resource manager. This is another thing that I've written many times in my life. So yep, when I think about doing this, I already know exactly what I need. I know I need the static instance, I know I need a dictionary, I know I need some functions to add and remove things. So really my point with all this, with all of that I'm trying to say, is really there's nothing special about me. You too can also gain this skill. You too can also be very fast at building all these kinds of systems. All you need is really just to have tons of experience. If you write as much code as I've written, then you will be just as good as me. So then at this point, my dog decided that he wanted some attention. He basically got up and he got on top of me. It's really quite tricky to write on a keyboard while he has his paws on me. Then I started working on the upgrade system. And first of all, started off by thinking, what exactly do I want to do? What exactly do I need? This is something that can be implemented in many different ways, so it does help to take some time before you actually write something to think of the various approaches and which one might be the best one. I basically ended up defining some upgrades as scriptable objects and really just refining a list that contains all of the upgrades that have already been unlocked. Then just some basic logic for the miner to check, do we own this upgrade? If so, make the mining much faster. And yep, with that, it worked. It's always awesome when things work. Now I can spawn another one, and now it should be working at double the speed. There you go. All right, awesome. That is cool. Whew, that is cool. Then I implemented costs for the upgrades and a bunch more things, and with that, I really had the core of the game working. So I could quickly place down some buildings, I could place down conveyor belts to connect the buildings between them. Then those buildings, one of them could gather things, one of them could drop off things. The conveyor belts could move items around, and really the whole thing's already starting to work. Just with this, I already have a basic factory game working. Then time to implement the crafting system, the crafting machines, and again, same thing. This is very easy because it's something that I've done many times previously. I've even made multiple crafting system tutorials over here on this channel. And it's really always the same thing, just define a scriptable object for the recipe with inputs and outputs, and that's really it. And since I took the time to write good clean code, because that, implementing the crafting machine and connecting that one to the belt, so the inputs, outputs, and all that, because I wrote some good code, that was very easy to do. So yep, this is very clearly the great benefit of writing good clean code. If you write something properly, then it becomes so much easier to expand upon it. So with this, at this point, the game was already definitely starting to take shape. I've got all kinds of inputs, outputs, conveyor belts, all kinds of connections, so everything works really nicely. And by the way, another reason why I was able to build all of this so quickly is because I was able to basically reuse a bunch of tools and assets. For example, for the camera system, moving the camera around, I literally just drag and drop something. I just used my own CodeMonkey Toolkit asset. This one contains a bunch of really helpful tools that I've built over the many years that I've been making games. This is really super helpful for speeding up development. And by the way, Unity is going to be having a Black Friday sale soon. So if you're interested in my toolkit or pretty much any other kind of asset, really just check the link and wait a few days. Same thing for Hot Reload. This is another really awesome asset that helps speed up compilation. It pleasantly applies patches to your code, so you can stay in play mode, constantly iterating upon your game and compiling new changes without having to exit play mode. This is also one of the top rated assets on the store, so I'm sure it will also be discounted. Anyways, then I made a bunch more crafting machines to craft a whole bunch more types. So I've got all kinds of inputs, outputs, crafting all kinds of things. Again, since I wrote good, high quality, clean code, this was relatively easy to set up. I just made another scriptable object, I made the other machine, I made a new script. I really just implement the interface and everything works together perfectly. And then was actually the super tricky part. So if you want to see me struggle in real time, then definitely watch this part of the live stream. This was when I wanted to make basically the unlocking system. Essentially, I wanted to unlock some buildings so that they stay around between each run. So for the most part, that is roughly really just a kind of safe system. I do have a tutorial that I made quite a while ago on how to do simple saving and loading. And despite being simple, and despite this tutorial being really old, it is still exactly how I handle saving and loading nowadays. What I did right now is literally what I covered in this tutorial. I really just define a new save object class, I define a save function and a load function, and really just store whatever that I want, whatever that I need in order to save that object. However, for this project, things were a little bit more tricky, because the buildings, those are really not just standalone, but they're actually connected to other things. For example, the mining machine is connected to a conveyor belt, the conveyor belt is connected to the time machine, so all those connections, those are quite tricky. In the logic, the connections are really just the actual building itself, so the reference is really just a game object, and you can't really serialize a game object. So yeah, this part right here was really quite tricky. I had to pause and think for myself for quite a while. I basically ran through a ton of different options in my head in order to try to figure out how exactly do I solve this. But just like I teach in my problem solving course, first you start off by solving the actual most basic version of the problem, and then you can expand upon it. So that's really what I did. I really just implemented basic and saving and loading of the actual buildings themselves, and only later on did I worry about saving and loading the connections, which was going to be the tricky part. After thinking about it for a long time, I finally decided, okay, I'm really just going to define some kind of ID, and then I can use that ID in order to basically serialize all the connections between them. So the ID is really just a random number, then that number is stored in the actual save data, and when loading, first I load the actual buildings, so I place them all back together, and then I check all the IDs that were saved, and then I look for the building that was loaded that has that ID and load that connection. So if this part was definitely very tricky, definitely required a lot of trial and error, a lot of thinking time, a lot of tough stuff. But after a while, I actually did manage to get it working. So that's the ID 612, that's the ID 458, and that one is connected to 612 and 20. Yep, that makes sense. And this is the belt 458. Now if I go back in the game, there you go, look at that, yay! Yay, it works, yay! Okay, awesome, whoo! That was tricky. That was tricky, but it worked. So yeah, it's finally worked. It's always awesome when something does work. Especially a problem kind of like this that takes quite a while, quite a bit of effort in order to make it work. When it finally works, it is really such a magical feeling. After getting this nice win, I really just made a pause. Then I did a bunch more work offline, and then came the final day. So for this one, I had about 10 hours left to finish the game. At this point, in terms of mechanics, the game was pretty much done. I could gather all kinds of different things. I had all kinds of crafting machines that worked. All the crystals had their actual effects. They were adding or moving time. So in terms of content, it was mostly done, which was definitely very much the plan. When it comes to a game jam, 48 hours. Usually I like to focus really hard on getting the mechanics solid, and then on the second 24 hours on the last day, on that one I would like to focus on pretty much just polish, just making the game's visuals. Which, yep, that is why up until this point the game is really just cubes and nothing else. Really because I was focusing first on the actual logic itself, the actual content, and then I want to focus on making it nice and pretty. Another thing that is always my advice whenever someone asks me for how do I stay motivated, how do I make games, my advice is always make a nice to-do list. For me, I find that helps so much, basically having a nice list of things that I need to do. Whenever I don't know what exactly do, I just go to the list, find the next task on the list, and really just start working on it. So for me personally, I find it helps quite a lot. I definitely encourage you to write all kinds of to-do lists with all the things that you need to do, and that way at least you have some sort of guide so you know roughly what exactly do you need to do. And that way you don't get stuck on analysis paralysis. You just go to the list, find the next thing you need to do, and really just do it. So it was finally time to handle the visuals, and when it comes to visuals, usually the first thing you should do, or perhaps the most important thing you should do, is really just post-processing. It's usually relatively quickly to add, and it will make a pretty massive difference in your game. So definitely don't miss this part, add all kinds of post-processing in the volume component, and then go into the render and add all kinds of screen space and explosion. At least for me, this is one of my favorite effects. It makes everything seem a little bit more grounded, it adds all those tiny shadows, which personally for me, I think it looks much, much better. Then for the meshes, for all those visuals, for that is another tricky part. Again, I'm not an artist, I am not good at either making visual assets or finding visual assets, but thankfully I have the help of another great asset. The asset inventory, this is one of my favorite assets. If you have tons of assets like I already knew, this basically helps you search through all of them so you can find exactly what you need. So this was really invaluable in actually making this game and making it within the time frame. I can just go onto asset inventory, search for crystals, and I can find all kinds of interesting crystals. So yep, this asset definitely recommended. Although in this case, for the visuals, a great channel member, Mr. Awesome, actually made a bunch of nice visuals. These were exactly what I needed, so I used them. I really just changed the color in order to make it suit the actual crystals, and there you go, everything looks quite nice. Then for the visuals on the conveyor belt, I just made a very quick scrolling shader. Really just something very simple. I really just use the time node, the tiling and offset node, really just connect those and you constantly have it constantly scrolling. However, of course, then it gets all messed up depending on the size of the mesh. You can't really stretch it out. So that needs a bit more logic in order to try to calculate the actual distance and modify the tiling and offset. But yep, just some basic math and that basically solves that problem. So really just go, calculate the distance and set that as a tiling and offset. And there you go, you can basically make conveyor belts of different sizes and they all match perfectly. Again, it's really awesome when something just works. Then building the visuals for the time machine. Now since I suck at art, the only thing that I can do is really just grab a bunch of random pieces and put them together and hope that it kind of looks like a time machine. So I really just picked up a bunch of random stuff, a bunch of random pieces. I think one of these is some kind of like freezer or something, or some kind of battery. Then on top is some kind of car part, so yeah, something very strange, but the whole thing looks obviously much better than a cube, so at least that. And of course I also need some actual icons, so for this, the easiest thing is really just go into Unity, capture a screenshot, then paste it into Photoshop, remove the background. Then I just like to add a bunch of outlines, and the whole thing suddenly looks like a nice icon. With just these kinds of visuals, the game was actually starting to look like an actual proper game. Everything had a bunch of visuals, so it now starts to look much better as opposed to just a prototype. After a quick break from lunch, I got back to work, and again, always work from a list, so always start by working from my to-do list. So I check it out just to see what exactly do I need next to do, and basically I need to make a main menu, the end scene, and so on. So I made another super basic main menu, really just play, quit buttons, and that's really it. And for the quit button, for the question dialog for that one, that is really just another tool from my toolkit. So it's a super easy way to add a confirmation layer to the player. Then I made a pause menu and defined the game's win screen, the game's win scenario. So basically you just need to hold on for enough. And if you do, then yep, there you go, you win the game. So with this, the game was actually playable from start to finish. I also spent some time polishing the UI, making it look a little bit better as opposed to really just having a square image. There are so many UI asset packs on the store that you can very easily polish your UI even if you have no art skills. And at this point, someone actually asked me for my typing speed, so I really just went on the website in order to test it out. Turns out I got words per minute of about 100 to 120. So that's pretty nice, that's pretty decent. Then I want to easily visualize the belt sockets, the inputs and outputs. And for that, I use another excellent asset. I use Highlight Plus. This is another great asset. It's one made by Chronic. It's a really great publisher. And this was actually an asset that I had not used previously. So over here on stream, you can actually see me trying to figure out how exactly does this asset work? What can I modify to get it working exactly as I want? After looking at the documentation, looking at the demos, I finally figured out a bunch of options that made it work. It took me a few minutes, but yep, I got it working. I got a nice visual for all the inputs and outputs, and yep, everything looks really nice. And at this point, time was counting down, really just 2 hours left to submit the game. So time to polish everything up. I started polishing with Text Animator, really great asset. It easily helps you make your text animated. Another excellent polishing asset is Feed. This one helps you add all kinds of tiny animations, tiny transitions. So it helps make everything feel much more responsive. I also polished the upgrade scene, and this was interesting. This one definitely took quite a lot of iteration to reach something where I think looks good. I experimented a lot with where exactly to put all the costs, the title, the icon, and so on. Definitely took quite a lot of experimentation, quite a lot of iteration to reach something that looked good. But yep, in the end, I'm definitely happy with how the final result came out. I think it does look really nice with all the icons, the costs, and so on. So yep, nice and readable, looks good. Then time for some more polishing and playtesting, which of course, that is obviously a very, very important part. As you're building the game, you need to make sure you're actually playtesting so the game actually works. And of course, remember how you as a developer, you have quite a lot more knowledge than the average player. So as you're figuring out game balancing, which is a very important thing, as you do that, keep in mind how you know quite a lot more than the average player. Especially a game jam player, players are really only going to play this game for a few minutes, so you can't expect them to have a ton of knowledge for your game, so everything needs to be very straightforward, very explainable. So I made lots of playtesting to ensure everything works, all the machines work, everything's nice and intuitive, everything's great. And it was working out quite nicely, but in terms of balancing, the final goal was actually way too difficult. As I was testing, it took about 10 minutes to reach the end. In fact, at the end, it actually seemed like I was just about to lose. I was going to lose just before I won the game, which was going to be very annoying. Am I gonna die? Am I gonna die? It's on 200. Oh boy. I think I might die before the 1 minute is over. So just wait in like 5 minutes and I'm gonna die. Oh man. Okay. Anyways, oh, win! Woo! Oh man. Oh, that was right at the end. Look at that. I had 80 left. That was close to dying. Oh boy, that was something. That was something. Epa ali. Opa. Opa, bebezinho. Já viste o jogo? Funciona. So thankfully everything worked fine. So I finally made a build. I finally uploaded it to Twitch. I submitted the game to Jam, and that was it. So yep, I'm pretty happy with how the game came out. And I'm definitely very happy that I achieved my own personal challenge. Could I make a factory automation game in just 48 hours? Turns out the answer is yes. Yep, I can. Definitely a very intense 48 hours, but still, I managed to write about 3,000 lines of code, managed to build a relatively complex game, managed to do that in such a short amount of time. But yeah, game jams are indeed stressful, very tiring, so that is why I rarely do game jams. Perhaps in 4 years, maybe I'll do another one, but yep, anyways, this was definitely quite fun. If you want to play the game for yourself, there's a link in the description. By the way, in case you're wondering, sadly, I cannot give out the project files with all the source code. I can't do that because I use all kinds of third-party assets, like field, text animated, and all of those. So because of that, I can't give out the project files, but hopefully you enjoy playing it. It's a pretty nice mini experience. And if you want to learn how to build games like these, then like I said, the answer is experience. And if you want to learn and gain experience, then right now I'm running a Black Friday sale with my courses. You can get the bundle for a ton of content with a deep discount. And I've also opened up more slots on my problem solving course. This one covers the very, very important topic of problem solving. This is also how I'm able to build such a complex game in such a short amount of time. It's because I'm already very good at solving problems. So if you want to learn, check the links in the description. Alright, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.